Wow. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. This is amazing. This is the most people we've had in this room, which is incredible. I think that speaks to the sacredness of the springs. Thank you for being here. We have an amazing group of speakers tonight. I am so excited to see this. So thank you to everyone who has come here to speak tonight. Thank you so much to Merritt, who organized this whole thing. And the Rights of Water. Thank you for that. There is a table for the Rights of Water in the back. I encourage you all to visit that table before you leave here tonight. There's also some donation kiosks sprinkled around. Anything you can donate would be helpful to us. We have an amazing videographer filming here tonight, and everybody has been volunteering their time for this, so we just really appreciate everyone. Thank you so much. Without further ado, we'll get started with Lou. We're going to hit the lights.
Thanks, Haley. Bear with me. Turn on. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Welcome. Thank you for coming. This program would not happen but for the generosity of the people at the Florida Springs Institute, because we're doing this with no budget. So if you enjoy tonight's program, if you like the kinds of things the Springs Institute is doing, there are 2 plexiglass donation boxes, one back there, one out here, and I think there's a donation jar on the back table. So please be generous. The other people who are here tonight that I want to mention are people working on the Florida Right to Clean Water proposed state constitutional amendment. If you heard about the amendment that was happening a couple of years ago, it's been revised. The effort is moving again. If you signed a petition 2 years ago, you need to sign a new petition. And Carl and David are here, and they have petitions on that back table, and they can also tell you how to donate to that effort. Because it's becoming, and this is my own opinion, I'm not representing FSI, it's becoming very clear that the state of Florida is not going to lift a finger to save our springs. So we have to find new ways to do that, and this petition is one of those new ways. So please give them whatever support you can, and please sign the petition. And thanks to Jim DeRocher, I don't see if he's back there, maybe he is, for our lovely flute music tonight. And thanks to Michael, who is recording our event for us. Thank you, Michael. So what are a bunch of artists, writers, and creative people doing here at FSI? A lot of you may not know, but when FSI was getting its start many moons ago, it was incubated for its first 3 years by an artists organization in Gainesville. So some of us were involved with that, some of us knew about that. So FSI was actually born out of an arts organization. So the tie is deep, it's long-standing, and it's strong. And I just wanted to make sure people knew about that. I want to start this evening by saying just a couple words about the zeitgeist, which is the spirit of the times, which is not good. And I want to, this is not going to be a gloom and doom presentation, but I want to read something that one of my Tibetan Buddhist teachers wrote because I think it's important. He was talking about living through a dark age, and he said, "It's called the Dark Age because the more uplifting and meritorious qualities of the human world are diminishing, whereas the gross and neurotic aspects of the human qualities are more present and becoming more apparent. One could say that it's like clear water that diminishes or dries up, allowing you to see the mud and clay appearing. This kind of situation has to do with the quality of the human mind. The link between the human mind and the environment is a really important one, and that's what we're going to deal with tonight. And what I'm hoping is that we can do some uplifting and a little bit of relief from what's going on and inspiration for further creative work. Where is my slide thing? Here we go. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why I was inspired to do this. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure-dome decree, where Alph, the sacred river, ran, through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. This is the beginning of a poem by Samuel Taylor Coleridge called Kubla Khan that was written in 1797, and it may well have been inspired by William Bartram's travels that were written in 1791. Over 200 years later, I heard echoes of this idea of a sacred river at Rum Island Spring. I was coming out of the spring. There was a woman standing on the bank, and she was looking at the water. And I just said in passing, "It's beautiful, isn't it?" And she said, "It's sacred." So there's this realization from a lot of us that what we're dealing with here are sacred places and sacred springs. Even now, we recognize them that way. Next slide. Another inspiration is this quote by Gus Speth, who was a co-founder of the Natural Resources Defense Council and has taught at Yale University's environmental program. And when I read this, I was like, this is it. He said, "I used to think the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address those problems, but I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with those, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists and lawyers don't know how to do that." Now, I want to make something perfectly clear. The science that's done here at FSI and at our universities is the bedrock on which we all stand as we work to save our springs. But it's not enough. We need culture change. When Cynthia Barnett, who's here tonight, yay, there you are. You're right in front of the light. When she wrote her book, Blue Revolution, she talked about a water ethic for Florida, for the world, actually. And what she was talking about is culture change, which is what we need to do. And from a writer up in Georgia, Janice Ray, I've learned that stories are the foundation of our culture. The stories we tell each other, the stories we tell to our families, the stories we tell to our neighbors. So this whole program is an appeal to see if we can learn to tell different stories from a spiritual basis that will change minds and hearts and eventually change our culture. And this gentleman is telling us, you need to step outside of your culture to see the shackles it has placed on your thinking. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. So we have people here tonight who have visited springs and waters that are considered sacred in other cultures. And so I'm hoping that our perspectives might shift. We're going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to ask you first, if you haven't already, please silence your cell phones. Please hold your applause for the speakers until the very end of the program, because as we finish speaking, we're going to leave our last slide up. Jim's going to play a little flute interlude, and what I'm asking you to do is just sit with what you've heard, see what ideas it may bring up, see what emotions it may bring up, see how you feel about what has been talked about. Let's see. There's a lot of different reasons places can be called sacred. By the use that they're put to, a place like Notre Dame Cathedral is a sacred place. Other places, I think, can be considered sacred because they have their own energy, their own power. The other thing is that sometimes when people go to places, they have unusual or what we call paranormal experiences. These experiences are very interesting to me and have been for years because you can't prove them. and you can't disprove them. So you may hear about some of those tonight, and please keep an open mind and just realize that the importance of those things is in the meaning that they carry for the person who experiences them. One of my spiritual teachers has suggested that to inspire real environmental change, we must evoke new emotions in people. So that's part of what we're trying to do. Our first speaker tonight is Margaret Ross Tolbert. She's a Gainesville artist and springs defender who is known internationally for her beautiful paintings of our springs. She's the author of 2 books, Aquafarius, 12 Florida Springs with Art and Narrative, and the newly released Project Sue, Water Project, Lito Joins the Springs. She also founded and manages the very active Aquafarius and Project Sue Facebook pages. Margaret has books for sale tonight. So, Margaret, your turn.
Sounds good. Hi, good night, everybody. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me pretty well? Yes. I think probably you could anyway, but yeah. So I wanted to thank Lou for her guidance and inspiration, and thanks FSI for hosting this event, and thanks Michael Monroe for recording us, and thanks to all these wonderful people that came out. We are talking a lot about miracles with water, and one of the main miracles that hopefully will happen tonight is that I speak quickly and get through all my slides. Cynthia, you know about this. So there's a Turkish proverb that says, "Fear the man looking at the ground and the water flowing slowly." So I'm going to try to go real fast. I even wrote it so I can read it. So the book is the project that I'm speaking about. The book is an 11-year project about water in ancient cultures, partly because I thought we don't know our water culture here. We kind of got rid of those people, so maybe we can borrow someone else's. And so I was so overwhelmed with what happens in present-day Turkey, but of course that was ancient Greece, and in Greece, and countries like that. So we'll race through some of this, and I hope you find it interesting or tantalizing. As Scripture says, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. When I am in contact with water, it creates a connection from deep within myself. In mythology, deities too appreciated this health-giving water. The Greek goddess Hera's virginity was restored annually at a spring. This is a strange use. Here I am in the ancient mother goddess Kibele's spring when she bathed in Eskişehir in central Turkey. She had good choice in springs. How are waters seen and treated as sacred? Sometimes through the rituals and through limited access, as sacredness implies sequestered distance. But in these places I've visited, they're not called sacred. This was interesting when I thought about it in Turkey, and then I asked some people. They call it, their value in their name is şifalı su, which is healthy water, and they're seen as a being. So they're seen as like the water proverbs say, be a saint like water, or water runs unnoticed under straw. And when my Turkish friends would talk about it, they said, you know what that's like? That's like a sneaky person. So they always liken water's behavior to people. And it's very interesting to have this relationship with water. It's a very close one. Here, Aiden Koch and I are looking up at an aqueduct in Lycia, the land of light in southwestern Turkey. A Lycian design built by Romans. Water, under pressure, snaked up and down valleys and mountains to Patara, where there was a water oracle. But that was from another spring. Aiden's sketches are on the right, and another drinking photo of mine is on the left. So I took these drinking selfies, and you'll see them throughout this talk. I've had the water's point of view looking at me drinking the water. Like all the team members, we traveled to and visited, swam, drank the waters. This proximity inspired and transformed our creative efforts. The image of a person drinking has to be an archetype for humanity. This is one of the most common gestures I remember in Turkey. People from all walks of life wash their hands, wash their faces in a fountain. They drink the water. Each of these fountains has a reputation for a kind of health benefit. This one's for children's diseases. This one's good for your stomach. This one's good for your sight. Since the time of the Byzantines and before, the springs have been the focus of a temple or a church. And some of the churches in Istanbul have been in continuous operation with their ayazma. Hayazma is a sacred spring for 1,400 years. During the decades I've traveled there, fountains have been used to supply a whole neighborhood, but they've fallen into disuse. But recently the fountains are being restored and flowing again. Here's a fountain next to the Spice Bazaar in Istanbul with a tin cup for the passerby who wants to drink. You can earn absolution for your soul, not by building a statue of yourself on a horse, but by building a fountain for the passerby. You earn like religious credits. And so in ancient times, that's what they did, the Ottoman sultans. Water was so highly valued that one sultan had it brought in silver pitchers to the palace from Karakulat spring across the Bosphorus under armed guard. Can you imagine us doing that with water? Yeah. That because of not crown royal or something? Or yeah. There's a spring, a tidal spring in a marketplace. And Perlu. This is Davul the black cat lounging in a former market fountain in the town of Kaş. So there are all these beautiful marble springs around. So su gözü, eye of the aquifer in Turkish. The phrase su gözü is water eye. The same words meaning occur in Hebrew, Armenian, Arabic, Farsi, Tartar, to name a bunch, and the word sounds exactly the same from Turkey all the way almost to China. And so there's somehow that the spring is an eye, is a very important concept over there. There's the eye. Here's a neighborhood spring in the country. The locals love it and they say the water is good for you. But this was also an imperial spring with a great temple, the statement of power of an empire. So this is from the celebrated miraculous became sacred in times of scarcity, like water, for the Hittite Empire in the 13th century BC. And they had this very interesting concept that I found so gratifying and hair-raising. Dingir Kaskal Kur is it's called the Royal Road of the Earth, but it's not like the Appian Way. It's not like, I can walk across the yellow brick road. It's the aquifer. So they felt that was the Royal Road of the Earth. It was where the water came in the mature karst conduits, and they said the ancestors lived there, the gods lived there, and if you offended the gods, they withdrew into the aquifer and you had a drought. And if you had a treaty and you wanted it ratified, you had to sign it in presence of the spring. I mean, this and Egypt were the biggest empires in the world at that time. And to think that they had this concept, to me, is very exciting. You had two sets of gods. You had, say, a sun goddess for above ground, but then below ground, you had the sun goddess of the water. I know, is that so smart? I can't believe it. And so, then this is Springs of Memory. So here's a painting of mine. Mnemosyne, the goddess of memory in ancient Greek myth, had a spring, and they said that all of humans' knowledge was in this bubbling spring, and that when you were born, you could take this knowledge from this spring. It was constantly like the springs we've seen with sand and silt going up, and when you pass away, you return the knowledge to the spring as you pass to the Elysian fields. So that was quite the motif for the whole world of human culture, was the spring. Springs are the basis for the myth that as the incentive for our travels. This is Anna Lovedine, one of the artists at the Temple for Leto, for Su. Here's the Temple of the Leto at the Lechun. Leto, the goddess in Greek mythology, with Apollo and Artemis, tiny children, right, searched for water to drink and was forbidden by shepherds loyal to the jealous goddess Hera. So then we're like, okay, where did she go? Where did she go get water to drink? That's a fundamental right. These temples and stories replace earlier shrines and altars dedicated to nymphs of the springs, the Elianas. So what I want to say in this talk as well, it's totally cyclical. We like to think, how did they do it back in Greek times? But there were so many layers of culture before that, and they came in their turn and took over and renamed and kind of appropriated these things, and they had a different kind of life with them. There was a statue of Eni Mahanahi, primordial Anatolian mother goddess was found at this place too, even though it had been renamed and reused. Okay, so here's Nazia Mistawi and the Leto. This is Aidan Koch's drawing of Leto with Apollo and Artemis. And this is the kids reenacting the scene. Leto, Apollo, and Artemis came to the springs to drink and quench their thirst, and they were pulled away by Hera's flunkies. And they're like, ah! So they really got into it. Many proverbs advise people to communicate with the springs. In Turkish, the water lets us see what to do. In Turkish, they say, if you have a problem, they say, tell it to the water. Then your problem will be solved. Water as oracle is the next thing. Water is the catalyst and container of knowledge. Many springs were seen as the doorway to prophecy through touch or ingestion of the water. So the Pythia, there she sits on her tripod on the left, at the Oracle of Delphi in Greece. The Pythia was a local woman of indeterminate age or background. The clients had to offer money or treasures and sacrifice a goat. The preparation for her was to be in a focused and undistracted connection with genius. She fasted, she exercised, I don't know what that means, and she spent a few days, I don't know, like, does that mean like us? You know, and she spent a few days readying herself. So the Temple of Delphi in Greece, the Aditon was the inner sanctum chamber underneath with its earthen floor through which gases and water vapor from the Castilian spring came. So this was an intersection of geologic faults that brought ethane, ethylene, and methane and water vapors to the surface. And now it doesn't operate that way. There's more fault activity, so the spring doesn't work that way at Delphi. But the Pythia would breathe these gases coming through the floor. Her statements were turned into poetic hexameters by the priests. The oracle operated 9 months a year while the gases were active. In winter, when it was not operating, clients went to the oracle of Apollo and Patara that we've spoken about in Lycia. So here's a sample prophecy. Okay, so Croesus was the wealthiest man in the world, and he had this empire of Lydia. And he heard the Persians were coming, and he wanted to stop them. So he goes, it takes him a year or two, but he gets the oracle to say she'll consider his request and his question. And he says, what happens if I attack the Persians? And she says, if you attack the Persians, a great empire will fall. And he's like, yes! So he goes and attacks the Persians, and his empire falls. So often it was more like advice. It wasn't like, oh, I'm a god and I'm going to intercede for you. It was more like kind of cryptic advice with the oracles. The process continues. In Didymah, which was this huge temple now in Turkey, after a time of preparation, the Pythia positioned herself on a bar across the springs. There was a sacred spring inside a sacred grove with laurel, and it was inside this enormous temple with 70-foot columns. Her foot or the hem of her dress touched the sacred spring in the sacred grove, and in this context, springs are sacred. Springs in a church are called holy water, hyasma. At Claros, the priest drank the water in the springs cave to be inspired to give prophecies. And of note, originally most of the Pythias, the oracles were female, until Apollo shouldered in. Limra had future foretelling fish and traveling springs. Diamond clear water comes directly out from over the mountain. Even through these changes, it's like Hittite, Lycian, Greek, Roman, Byzantine, Limra, the springs persist. For example, sailors came to the oracle of Apollo in Patara for their questions and blessings when they went to sea, captains, until the oracle silted up totally. They've never found this oracle totally. They kind of know where it is, but they've never gotten it from under the sand. Then they went to Dimre for blessings from St. Nicholas, Santa Claus. Near St. Nicholas, it is Santa Claus. Near St. Nicholas Church in Dimre, an ancient temple was erased by a mudslide. So the Christians said, oh, it was because it was pagan. So it's like, wait for it. And St. Nicholas tried to destroy every trace of Artemis, especially, and she was about nature and sacred trees. We've got to get rid of them, chop them down. Then they then built a beautiful chapel themselves. And what happened? The chapel was covered in a mudslide. So I saw it one day. I got lost in the town, and I looked down, and about 20 feet below the street surface, through all this mud, was this exquisite chapel. And I'm like, oh, that's what that joke was about, you know. So you can destroy the temple of Artemis or the church, but you cannot and must not destroy the springs. So Sura, there's a laborious and difficult approach in this ancient oracle. At the confluence of the spring run and the sea, priests fed the fish food on skewers, and if the fish ate it, that meant yes for your query. One account says the fish included whales and sawfish. So this was a vortex caused by the seawater coming into the fresh spring water. So after a while, I think that looks like a face, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. This is the Roman temple. You can still go there. There's the Roman temple. But after a while, am I painting messages of the oracles? But then after a while, they build the church there, and then they take over the oracle too. So, and then I swam the oracle. So I swam my destiny. And it was the fastest way to go. Okay, Green Lake. This is called Green Lake up at a place called Gurumbe. Abdel Musa was a traveling Alevi mystic. He would pass through villages and give blessings in return for hospitality. The first village chased him away. They said, "You're a bum, get a job," you know. At the second village, he was treated with great kindness. He said to them, "How can I repay you for your hospitality?" They said, "We need water for our crops in the summer." So he moved. There's a waterfall called Flying Waters, Ucharsu. He moved the waterfall from the ungrateful village to the grateful village. And as it turns out, every year, this giant Flying Waters waterfall, in May, it shifts. And it shifts about 30 degrees, and it goes and dumps all the water on another area. Then in the fall, it shifts back. So here are the springs around Mount Olympus, where Pegasus the winged horse was found. His name means springs, and each time his hoof struck the ground, its spring spurted forth. Eyes of flame from the mountain where the Chimera remain imprisoned. Fire altar at the springs of Munzur Baba in eastern Turkey. The sign says, let's see if I can get this to work. You know, the fire burns. But they always have these altars with fires frequently at a spring, and I wonder what that was about. And the sign says to let go of your sins and passions and lust. And my friends are like, "Oh, we don't know. We just light a candle and make a wish." And frequently the fire was about purification, memory, and wishes. But water was always about welcome. And even wait for it. There's Munzur Baba. And even the kitties know about those wonderful springs. So there are lots of cats and dogs there too. The April cup at Mevlana Rumi's tomb was for collecting spring rain. If you dipped Mevlana's turban in the water, it was used for healing. For Hudrellez, an ancient festival of spring, first you write your wishes, then you bury them under a rose bush. Then you get them out the next morning and you throw them into the sea. You're supposed to picnic by the water and spend time by a body of water because the prophet drank the water of immortality, and that's what you're celebrating. And proximity to the water changes you. On Hudrellez Day, here's what you need to do. So it's like May 4th or 5th. Go outside at 5 in the morning. Collect the dew from the grass. Use it for the yogurt starter for the next year. And it's good luck. Okay? At many springs emerging from the caves, there is a wishing tree. Nature bringing forth realization of wishes. And there are many votive offerings, small statues found in the springs cave. Constant communication over time between humans and springs. Another selfie, the water's point of view. Let's celebrate the health and life-giving gifts of freshwater springs. Let them be sacred from appreciation and not for political benefit or from scarcity. Thank you.
If you could hold your applause till the end, we're trying to have a little meditation in between speakers. Our next speaker is Joon Thomas, who has a long involvement in educating the public about Florida Springs. A Gainesville-based artist, printmaker, and calligrapher, Joon is a founding member of the Sweetwater Print Cooperative, now celebrating its 30th anniversary, and teaches Chinese history and calligraphy at the Academy for Five-Element Acupuncture. You can find Joon's work online at palmstone.com and worldcalligraphy.com. Do you want to use the mic? No. No? Okay.
If you can't hear me, complain. Otherwise, I'm not going to use the mic. My name's Joon. I've lived in Gainesville for a long time now, but I grew up in a big city. This is Tehran, the capital of Iran, and when I was a little child, it was just over 2 million people. By the time I finished high school, it was over 5 million people, and today it has about 20 million people. And the water for Tehran comes from that snow up there. When I was a small child, the view of the mountains was so clear that I used to imagine that I could take my finger and just cut it along that sharp ridge of snow. But by the time that I was in 5th grade, so many cars had poured onto the streets that if you could see the mountains, it was through a thick haze of smog. But the reminder of the snow was still present all the time because this vast network of water channels goes alongside every street of the city and waters the trees. And when I was a child, those water channels still filled these small pools or that were in almost every courtyard or garden of the city. In Persian or Farsi, the word for a spring is chesh or cheshmeh, which means eye. And and we always thought that these pools were the eye of the garden. Now, I survived living in such a big city by escaping into the mountains whenever I could. And fortunately, by the time we were 11 or 12 years old, my friends and I could go by ourselves. You could take a city bus to the end of the line, walk through the village, and find yourself in the mountains. And if you can imagine going with me today, it's summer, it's hot, it's dry, and we're going to go to a place that's a popular picnic spot. It's called Haftoz, which means 7 pools. And you can see there the pools and the waterfalls in between them. There are actually several places in Iran with the same name. I guess 7 is auspicious and nature is cooperative. But today we are not going to splash in that beautiful cold water, slide down the waterfalls. It's great fun. And enjoy that coolness. And we're not going to stop at the tea house and listen to the stream gurgling. We're going to push on up the valley. And I said it was dry, and you can feel the dryness there. You can see the leaves are just, desiccated on the summer trees. Sometimes you can see the reflection of the sky in the water. It's beautiful. But as we go farther up the valley, the stream bed becomes rockier. The path is narrower. We have to push our way through a flock of sheep that's making its way down. Very true. And now we get to the top of the spring, and there is a tree. Now, this is not one of the grander springs of Iran. There's no garden, no large pool, no structures. But obviously, people have been there because here stands a tree, faded tatters of cloth knotted in the branches, moving in the dry, hot air. Each knot represents a heartfelt request by someone who has come here to make their vow, that they might conceive a child, that a child get better, that there be enough snow next winter to supply water for the rest of the year. In this environment, the snow and sun and water are linked to each other. This spring is an eye opening among the rocks where ice-cold water emerges after traveling underground from the snow on the mountain ridges high above. An ancient word in Persian for love is mehr. You'll know this word as mitra, which is known from India onwards, or Mithra. Mithraic religions goes all the way to the British Isles. Mitra or Mer is the ancient Indo-Iranian guardian of waters, but is often represented as the sun. And as such, Mer is the mediator between God and humans, the keeper of covenants or agreements. The word has so many layers of meaning because it's such an ancient concept. So it can mean covenant, friendship, love, mercy, a gift or bequest, knowledge, and prosperity. And each length of fabric tied to this tree is a covenant or an agreement that the requester is making, vowing that in return for the request that they're asking, they will keep their side of the agreement. Where's my thing? Beneath the tree, the spring slides ice cold under the water, rustling the wild mint and nettles that are there and releasing a pungent smell into the air. To this day, that smell is in my memory as the smell of water in the mountains. Even as kids, we knew that when we came to this spot, as unmarked as it was, to try to light a fire, sometimes that was difficult. In the winter especially, there's not a lot of fuel around. It's a very dry environment. But on this summer day, maybe we can finally get in the water. It's a smooth, white stone stream bed there, and you can just slide down. My second story happens at a very different time of year. It's winter. It's still and cold. The trees are dark against the landscape. There are patches of snow on the ground. Otherwise, it's a clear day. This is the only time I went in the mountains with an actual professional guide. A teacher at my school had hired him and invited me to come along. And I think we were planning to go up high in the mountains where there was a stone shelter where we could light a fire and spend the night. But no sooner had we started out than the guide said, "Oh, the weather's about to change, and instead of climbing high, we're headed west just along the lower foothills of the mountains." And soon enough, sure thing, the sky turned gray and it started to snow. And we came to the top of a narrow valley. We clambered down the stones and came to a place where there was just a wall around a large compound or enclosure. We went down onto the frozen stream bed. There was a low arched tunnel, and we clambered through that tunnel and found ourselves on the inside of this complex. Where are we? We're at the back of a large shrine complex. And on this night, it's closed. There are no pilgrims. We didn't see the Golden Dome lit up at night. We didn't go inside where the turquoise, entryway or the prayer hall. We didn't go into the brightly lit domed chamber where the tomb of the holy person was. There are thousands of these types of shrines in Iran. I tried to look up to find out how many there are, and the best guess is that there are over 8,000 of them. And it's considered more, acceptable that these are to Sufi saints or holy people than to mention in particular that they're next to a spring. But it turns out that almost every one of these shrines is next to a spring or some other body of water. And surely most of these are built on places that predate Islam and that are very, very old. When pilgrims come, they grasp forward to try to touch the lattice work of the tomb and ask for their requests, tying knots of cloth and other offerings to it. This particular complex is really large, but some of them are very modest affairs. The spring water flows in to the compound, and the people, this is what people use to do their ablutions before entering the shrine and praying. But people also go to the actual springs themselves, right outside the complex. There the water's pouring out from the rock, tumbling downwards and splashing down in the waterfall as it enters the shrine. On this night, it's cold, no pilgrims. The lone caretaker comes down and invites us to his room. He has one flame for light and for whatever amount of heat it's going to give us. And darkness closes in, and in the deep, cold stillness of the mountain valley surrounds us. We go to sleep, but through the thick earthen floor, I sense the flow of spring water moving silently under the ice.
Well, from Iran to Tibet. I'm Lou Merritt. I'm a writer who's been working on Springs issues since about 2011. I've been fortunate enough to study with several teachers who were born in Tibet and came to the USA to teach about the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, which has a lot to say about the interconnections between humans and the world around us. I'm on Blogspot as a word witch, where I write about springs and my Buddhist path. But before I get to Tibet, I want to tell a story about the first time I went to Ichtuckney, because this is story night. I first went to Ichtuckney in the fall of 1969, which was the year before the state bought the land that became a state park. I was with my two college roommates, and we were the only people there at the head spring. We got in the spring, we splashed around, we had a great time, and I was getting to where my fingers were starting to pucker. If you've ever stayed in the water too long, you know what that's like. And I was getting a little chilly, so I got out of the water. Chad and Pam stayed in the water. I went up the little hill where the restrooms are now. There was nothing there then. I put my towel down, I lay down in the sun, and I was warming up and just feeling clean and wonderful and rejuvenated. And I started to hear some noise. And it was like you would call a cat, you know, the noise. And it got louder and louder and louder. And it finally resolved into words. But it was not a language I had ever heard before. So I thought, okay, there's somebody in the woods. We're not the only people here. So I stood up, turned around, I did a 360, I was checking it out. There was nobody there. I have since learned from my parapsychology teacher that these kinds of auditory hallucinations are really common experiences that people can have in places where there has been an imprint left of strong emotion. So I never figured out what it was, but then I got some teachings from my Buddhist teachers. This was the head spring, obviously, of the Ichitutni, where all that happened. So I started to wonder, maybe it was the language of the Nagas. Now, the Nagas are something I learned about from my Buddhist teachers. They have the torso of a male or female human. They have the lower body of a snake. They live in springs. They live in magical trees. There are 3 kinds of Nagas. Now, some people are said to be able to see them. I am not one of those people. But there are supposedly 3 kinds of Nagas. There's good Nagas, there's mutable Nagas who can be good or bad, and there's bad ones, and you don't want to mess with the bad ones. But the thing that they have in common is that water pollution makes them sick. And when they get sick, they seek revenge in the form of natural disasters and skin diseases. And so I don't expect you to believe in Nagas. I believe in them because my teachers are trustworthy, and I have no problem believing in things that I can't see. But what an analogy for where we are now with our springs, with pollution, with natural disasters. And there's even one elder in the springs advocacy community who can't go in the water anymore because he has an allergic reaction to algae. So it's just a little thing that I think is very interesting. And again, it's the connection between the mind and what we do, what we put out in the world, and then what the world gives back to us. Okay, next slide. This is a pen that was designed by the Karmapa, who's the head of one of the Buddhist schools that I'm most closely affiliated with. And he designed it for a prayer festival. It actually represents humanity holding hands with the earth, like this. He thinks of the earth as a benevolent goddess. And here's what he wrote about the design of this pen, which speaks to the idea that human beings and Mother Earth exist in an interconnected relationship. Now the time has come when the earth is scowling at us. The time has come when the earth is giving up on us. The earth is about to treat us badly and give up on us. If she gives up on us, where can we live? There's talk of going to other planets that could support life, but only a few rich people could go. What would happen to all of us sentient beings who could not go? What should we do now that the elements of the natural world need to join their hands together? Wait a minute. What should we do now that this situation has become so critical? The sentient beings living on the earth and the elements of the natural world need to join their hands together. The earth must not give up on sentient beings, and sentient beings must not give up on the earth. Each needs to grasp the other's hand. Note that he mentions the importance of joining hands with the elements of the natural world. In Buddhism, these elements are earth, water, fire, air, and space, and that's not necessarily outer space, but it's the space between things. So one of the things that's very interesting about this is that in Tibetan Buddhism, the essential nature of the element of water is considered to be a Buddha, a female Buddha called Mamaki. So water is a sacred element in this system. So I wonder, how do we hold hands with Mother Earth? What would be different if we talked about our springs not as resources or recreational opportunities, but as Buddhas, as living natural systems? What if we told our stories about springs with reverence? What if we understood water as something that's alive and sacred with which we exist in relationship, as something that deserves our care? Because for a lot of us, that's what water is. There's also some thinking in the paranormal community that is also coming out of quantum physics, that it's relationships and not atoms that are the building blocks of our world.
Yeah.
But that's another discussion. So what I'm wondering tonight is, can we hold hands with Mother Earth and with our priceless springs on a spiritual level? And what might change if we elevated our relationship and our stories in that way? Our next speaker is Wendy-Lin Bartels. She's a University of Florida anthropologist and research assistant scientist in the School of Forest, Fisheries, and Geomatic Sciences who lives in Micanopy. She's worked internationally in Africa, South Asia, and Latin America, and is on the project team for the Florida Natural Resources Leadership Institute. She's especially interested in rural development, family farming, and bringing diverse stakeholders together to exchange knowledge and ideas.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It is good to be together tonight, isn't it? Yeah, what a beautiful group of faces. Thank you for having me, Lou, and for inviting me here. I belong to a global family. As you know, my accent is not very southern, but I am working on my southern accent. I come from South Africa, and I was born and raised there, and my two siblings, my brother and sister, still live in South Africa. And my other sibling, my older sister, well, younger than me, but the oldest one, is living in Perth in Australia. And so it's a trek to find each other. But we're really committed to being together, and so we rack up a lot of credit card debt, and we travel and we meet each other across the world. Last year we met in Mozambique, which was close to home, close to South Africa. But the year before we went for Thanksgiving to Indonesia. Has anyone here been to Indonesia before? Go. It's very special. 17,000 islands, right? 280 million people. It's the fourth most populous country in the world. And actually the most populous Muslim country in the world. So there's a lot happening there. And because of its tropical climate and that it's like an archipelago of islands, and because it's so uniquely placed, it's been termed a mega diverse country. So it has incredible biodiversity. And of course, because it has all those people, there's a connection between the number of people and saving some of that beautiful biodiversity. And we didn't go there for that. We just went there to see each other, you know, because we were like, it's near Australia, it's somewhere near South Africa, let's go there. But when I was there, I had an experience at a spring, and the first person that I sent a photograph to was Lou, because we had worked together, and I was like, you have got to see this. So I want to share a little bit of that with you tonight. And I put this up here because I think it's important, because I was going to see my family and they mean a lot to me. And so I think even as I was arriving in Indonesia, my heart was like wide open. And so I think when we have like such a wide open heart, like anything is possible, you know? And Indonesia definitely welcomes open-hearted people. So I would like to share with you 3 things. The first thing is about the holy spring that I was able to visit, called Pura Tirta Empul. And just so that you know, I am an anthropologist, but I do not study Indonesia at all. I am like clueless about this country and the culture, so I'm just speaking as a tourist, honestly. But there are incredible systems there that are worth really studying and understanding. One of those is the Subak system of irrigation, rice paddy irrigation, which is pretty magnificent, and I'm going to share a little bit about that. And then the final one is the system of Kanang Sari, which is ritual offerings that happen daily, many times a day, all the time. So this is the spring that I visited with my sister and our family. It's called Pura Tirta Empul, and this is holy water that is said to be created by Indra. And just to let you know that this is on the island of Bali. So Bali is a very small part of the 17,000 islands that are there, and it is very unique because it's not Javanese culture, it's Balinese culture. So Hindu and Buddhist religion is very prevalent. But one thing to know about Indonesia is that there is an emphasis on religious pluralism. And so all of the religions are welcomed in that space. Here, mostly it is Hindu and Buddhism. And it's pretty close to a very touristy place called Ubud, where many people do go. And it is dedicated to Vishnu, and the temple itself was founded in 962 AD. But at this place, it is believed that the water can purify you if you bathe in that water. And it's said to be one of the holiest places to bathe in Bali. And this is what it looks like when you witness the melukat, which is the ritual purification ceremony. So Lou asked me to explain how I felt while I was there. I did not bathe in the water because I hadn't really prepared for that. And I think maybe there's a preparation that goes with some of these sacred bathings. And also I was very torn about cultural appropriation, and I kind of arrived and I was this tourist. But I was amazed to witness people that were bathing there. The thing that I guess I sensed a lot was firstly anticipation. People stand in very, very long lines waiting for a long, long time to get their turn to be under the pure water. And during that time, you kind of have, as you're witnessing or watching that, you kind of have this, you can kind of feel the sense of longing that people have, that they've been carrying with them. When we heard about the tying of the knots and the agreements and the wishes and the requests that people are making, you feel that. And so when people arrive at the water, many of them begin to weep. And so they're weeping and they're washing themselves under the water, and you just get the sense that they are trying to release a suffering or going through some sort of grief that they are letting go of, or asking for something that they have been longing for a long time. And that could all be just my imagination, but that's the feeling that I took from the place. And definitely as people leave, there is this sense of relief, release, gratitude, lightness as people leave the space. And this is just a picture that I got to indicate that people prepare a lot for the bathing, and this is a group of young women that went to bathe together and that are worshiping before they bathe. What happens also before bathing is a lot of offerings. I'll show a picture of that in a minute, but there are a lot of offerings to the gods prior to the purification. So this is linked to the subaks that I wanted to share with you. When you look at that picture, it looks just like terraced rice paddies, right? but actually this is a UNESCO site. It's very, very precious, and it kind of hides the beauty that sustains it. The subaks are these irrigation systems that have been created thousands of years ago and were created around rice paddies. And essentially, again, it's the water that is holy and flowing through those systems. So there's a lot of writing on the slide, so I'm actually going to skip it because too much writing. So here you can see a canal. The water runs through these canals, and then at each of the fields there are shrines where the water is blessed and let into the rice paddy, and it's all timed, of course, with the life cycle of the crop, and the decisions are made together as a group of how the water flows and where it goes, and the priests that are in charge of those ceremonies, they have dances with gamelan music to create the decisions, to create the space to make the decisions of how the water will flow each year, and to me, it was just really touching. I started thinking to myself, wow, imagine if the water management districts had shrines. Like, what if we had shrines here and we could make decisions like that? So that was mind-blowing for me. And yeah, one of the things that these priests are I think there's a word for it. It's called Tri Hirta Karana, is what the priests practice, and the tree is for three, and basically it's the three goals of harmony with nature, harmony among people, and harmony with spirit. And so that's really the connection that they are trying to foster through these ceremonies and through these shrines. And that's what you feel. You feel the harmony with nature, you feel the harmony with one another, and you definitely link to spirit. So here are some of the offerings that were made at the Tirtha Temple. Offerings are serious business, and you don't only give them to the gods that you like, you give them to the demons. In fact, you feed the demons so that they will keep their distance. And offerings are not, worship in this way is not something that happens for 1 hour, once a week, in a formal space. It happens every day, 3 times a day, on the beach, at the bank, at the hotel. These small little offering baskets are carried around. Every time you look, there's a lady bringing offering baskets and putting them down where the waves are coming onto the sand, or at the corner of the bank, or even like at the Burger King, there's an offering on the ground. And so it's a beautiful thing, because it's just a reminder that to connect to the divine, we need to have rituals, we need to have reminders to go back to that place of harmony with spirit. And so that kind of brings me to the end. Lou asked me to talk about what the sacred means to me. And I was like, what? How am I going to do that? How would you do that? It's hard to articulate, right? And so I started thinking that so much of my day I spend in my mind. I spend like up here, and then every now and again I go down into my body, and then every now and again I go into my heart. And it's when I can do that, it's that movement from my cognitive space into my body and into my heart that kind of clicks me into connecting with the divine. And I can't really explain it except to say that it is a sense of so much space and kind of beyond time and very quick. It's like a moment, and then I come back to the material space again and the clutter of life, and I have a sense that I have kind of an amnesia. Like, I can't really remember the sacred place when I'm in this material space, except when I go back. Then I'm like, oh yeah, here I am again, and you kind of like go there, and then you're there. And so for me, it's really important to try to find ways to remind me who I am when I'm there, so that I can just quickly go back there as often as I can. And so I create rituals for my day to take me there, because I don't find that our daily rituals really do much of that for us anymore. So for me, I connect through trees to that place, but I think water and soil and the earth are other portals. I think sometimes people can be portals too, through dance and poetry and music, but sometimes not. So I appreciate being able to go to that space, and thank you for being here.
Next up is Stephen Earl. He's a photographer, videographer, musician, and artist who's also a former Florida Park Service ranger who worked at Ichetucknee Springs and Gold Head Branch State Parks. He's the creator of Ichetucknee Sacred Waters that includes his art and was published by the University of Florida. It's an absolutely beautiful book, and he has books for sale tonight. So, Steve, you're up.
How's everybody this evening? What a lovely group. Thank you for coming out. What I mainly want to share with you this evening is my relationship to the Ichetucknee and why I consider it sacred. And I want to do a reading from my book about the very first time I ever laid eyes on the Ichetucknee. Can everyone hear me all right? Okay. Nothing had prepared me for the day in 1983 when I first met the Ichetucknee River. Not the influences of a mother with an open, tender heart, a wise soul who was a disciplined meditator and lover of God. Not the influence of a father who was a nature photographer, jazz musician, artist, naturalist, and environmental champion. Not the experiences of long ago vacations spent in the spectacular places such as Georgia's wild Wally Isles, the mountains of Appalachia, or the unspoiled coastline of Florida's Panhandle. Not even the stories told by my father of having canoed down the Ichetucknee some 10 years prior while working on his photographic book, John Muir's Longest Walk. No, nothing had prepared me. Here I sit on the bench at Blue Hole, shivering, stunned and in awe, after swimming out over the boil and peering down into the eye of the spring. I have no previous knowledge that the phenomena of springs and spring-fed river and systems even exist. This is all totally miraculous. Shimmering shafts of sunbeams streak down the turquoise depths, the play of light and shadow dancing on the rippled white sands below. Unseen fossils of mastodon, American lion, and giant land sloth lie asleep in her watery womb. Timucuan napped spear points lie buried deep in her banks of rich floodplain earth, unseen by human eyes for thousands of seasons. Bejeweled iridescent dragonflies of every hue cruise in and out of stately cypress trees, some alighting momentarily atop brilliant red cardinal flowers and ivory white spider lilies. Above the cypress trees I sit admiring sail several of the most magnificent bird in all of God's creation, the swallowtail kite, with its stunning black and white plumage and deeply forked tail. In pursuit of dragonfly, they put on an aerial show like no other, executing maneuvers that boggle my mind and make my heart soar. I am spellbound by this never-before-seen creature of overwhelming beauty and grace. A mixture of subtle scents wafts in the air, including cypress oils, spring water, floodplain humus, and at water's edge, the delicate fragrance of eelgrass blossoms as they periodically bob to the surface on swaying strands. Sitting quietly and counting my newfound blessings, I become aware of the mind-centering drone of summer cicadas, fresh from their years-long sojourn beneath the earth. As does ancient music, this droning has the effect of freeing my mind of thought, and thus opens my consciousness to receive the gifts of my surroundings. Relaxing deeper, I begin to feel at one with the ebb and flow of my realm, the swirling water, the thrum of insects, and the life force within me. Unbeknownst to me, on a much deeper and subtler level of my being, a life-altering transformation is taking root. I am bonding with what will become my home and beginning to recognize what is known as sense of place. I have found the center of the world. For the next 12 years, I lived close to the land in full-time relationship with the river. A primitive log cabin over 100 years old atop the underground headspring source in the river trace provided shelter and hearth. Living in such close proximity to the river, I was able to spend a vast amount of time interacting with the environment. At first, this included furthering my sense of place by practicing the art of open-eyed meditation in remote locations, through which I became keenly aware of my surroundings and the interconnectedness of all things, absorbing these experiences into the deepest level of my being. Out of this connectedness arose many other things: peace, knowledge, gratitude, artistic inspiration, and stewardship of place. The Ichitutni became my muse, the focus of my photography, filmmaking, painting, and musical composing. I observed, too, that the very art of composing through the camera lens all day further focused my meditation and my insight into this most beautiful place. It is my prayer and hope that my life and work will inspire people to devote space in their busy lives to slow down, be still, be aware, and commune with nature regularly. I especially hope that parents and educators will reunite children with the wonders of nature. Positive environmental and personal change occurs each time a person bonds with the natural world, thus fostering peace within and a desire for stewardship of the planet we call home. So that really was the beginning, even that first day, which, thank you, George Medicine Wind Tortorelli, for taking me there that first day. I recognized immediately, hi Loy, I recognized immediately the sacredness of the springs. Do I believe that springs are inherently sacred? I do. I also have come to realize, after a 42-year relationship with the river, that the more I honor it, the more sacred it becomes. And so I honor the river daily in many different ways. The creation of my book was a form of honoring. Raising my children to love the river and respect it and take care of it for generations to come is a way of honoring. I brought this bowl with spring water in it. It's a way of honoring. I want to share with you another way that I honor the river. Thank you, George. He and I built this together. So what I did was I dove down to the bottom of all of my favorite springs and grabbed a handful of the material at the bottom of the spring. The sand, which is the eroded mountains of Appalachia that were once as high as the Himalayas. Any number of, ancient animals that lived on the river, people, little bits of pottery from the Timucuans that lived there, whatever was in the material. Gathered that from the bottom of each spring, sifted it into 3 different grits, and experimented until I found just the right recipe. And so what I would like to do now with the minute or so I have left in my 10 minutes of presentation, I'd like to use that minute and the minute of reflection, and so I've had 2 minutes, to play you a little bit, a recording from Grassy Hole Spring that Johnny and another good friend of ours, mutual friend of ours, and myself recorded. And the flute can go with that as well.
Next up, we have Johnny Dame, who's an artist, naturalist, and earth shepherd. A 7th-generation Floridian, his heritage is English, French, Spanish, and Choctaw. He's worked as resident artist and naturalist at both Mount Shasta in California and the Spirit of the Swanee Music Park here in Live Oak. Johnny describes himself as a lifelong student of synchronicity and as a phenologist, a person who studies nature and nature's cycles. To turn that on.
If I need this or not. Can you hear me in the back pretty well? Excellent. Greetings, everybody. I am so honored to be here tonight. There he is. All these people on this panel are like superheroes to me. Not only on this panel, but many, many, many people in this room I've known like family for many years, and I'm inspired and I admire all of you very dearly, especially for your love for the springs and the natural world and for Florida. And I'm just incredibly humbled and honored to be part of this. I was born in Winter Haven, Florida, in 1961, on the Winter Haven Ridge, physiographic landform that lies in between the Lake Wales Ridge and the Lakeland Ridge to the west. I was born in the Sand Hills. At one time was characterized by longleaf pines, Florida scrub, marshlands, lakes, hardwood hammocks. There's still a little bit of that left in my homeland. I was born in the Peace River watershed, which is also known as Tolbert Chopko, Seminole Creek language. And my mother's mother was Choctaw, and my father's mother was not genetically Native American, but she was a Florida Native American historian. And she was born in Inverness, Florida in 1889 and grew up with black people that had lived with the Seminoles. So she actually knew people that knew Osceola. And she learned a lot of Native American place names and the names of plants and animals. She also knew and learned a lot about medicinal plants. So when my grandfather, Dr. George Alvadane, came down from Emory in 1904 to start a practice, he found her, and when he discovered her knowledge of the herbal plants, he was like, "You're coming to me." So they got married in 1907, and 1908, my grandfather and a number of other people created what the Florida Board of Health. So my family's been involved in environmental health in Florida all along. But when I was born, my dad recognized early on that I had an unusual knack for finding special places on the earth. And we used to play a game. And what we would do is I would get in the car. You got to understand, back in the early 60s, there were no laws about children being in the front seat or car seats. You know, as a matter of fact, a lot of the seats in these old cars were like benches. And I would stand on this passenger seat, and Dad would say, "All right, Johnny, where are we going to go? Go that way, Daddy. Go this way. Turn this way." We'd be driving through orange groves and by forests and by these lakes. I said, "That's it, Dad. Pull off here." So 19 out of 20 of the places that we went to, we walked out and then immediately found Indian artifacts. So this is one of the skills that I have. I have a very psychic connection to the natural world. And my dad recognized it at an early age. My grandmothers both recognized it. And so I was actually encouraged to practice and explore this. So when we lived in Lake Alfred, where I grew up, there was a wonderful natural area called the Mackay Estates. It's owned by a wonderful Scottish family that I would ultimately bond with and become very close to. And this land was about 550 acres of various ecosystems. There was longleaf pine and sandhill. There was a little bit of scrub. There were pine flatwoods, scrubby flatwoods, bay laurel swamp. There was a magnificent cypress area in the middle of the swamp where there was a heart-shaped opening in the trees. And I always felt very, very inclined to acknowledge the heart there. And I started to formulate my own kind of organic prayer work with the land in this place. And Mackay became my first land guru. So I've had land gurus through my life that taught me and trained me to understand different kinds of forms of earth spirituality. So when I went to Sarasota to go to the Ringling College of Art and Design, my friend Howard brought me to a place called Horse Creek, also known as Chilocotachee in Seminole Creek language. Does anyone know what Chilocotachee translates to? Horse Creek. So I started to explore this place, and I had a very phenomenal vision quest in the spring of 1982. And I met an angelic spirit guide who was, she said she was the governing angel of this watershed, which I thought was a very unique idea, that there could be a spiritual being that might be connected to a natural system. It made sense to me. I'd always sensed it before, but she made it very clear that this was very real. And I ended up training with her at Horse Creek. Now, Horse Creek, as you can see, is a tannin-colored stream. And I rendered it realistically for about a year. And then all of a sudden, uncharacteristically, I started rendering it as if it had spring water, like it was a blue river. Now, this was a conundrum, because I'm a stickler for authenticity. And this wonderful tannic stream is being rendered unrealistically, but I cannot resist making it look like a spring-fed river. And like, I don't know what this is about, but there must be something to it. So I found a place on Horse Creek where there was an island, and that island was shaped like a heart. So the heart motif keeps coming up in the cosmology of my time. So when I finished my third year at Ringling, I was offered some pretty lucrative jobs up in New York City. And I had been asked in my vision quest to become a spokesperson for the earth, which I wholeheartedly accepted. But working in New York City did not seem to be in alignment with this, so I was concerned. And my cousin Charlie, who's very psychically attuned to me, called up one night and says, "Brother, I'm picking up on you, man. What's up?" I said, "Man, I've been offered these jobs. They're very, very lucrative. It'll advance my career, but I don't know that I can feel good about this." He says, "Well, before you make any decisions at all, you got to come to North Florida. I've got something to show you." So I went up the very next day, and on May the 12th, 1984, I went to the Ichetucknee River for the first time. And we got on inner tubes, and we went down the river, and we found different springs, and the crystal clarity of the water and all the incredible symbiotic symphony of life forms working together in integration really activated something inside of my being. And we came up on this springs run, and we went in and we found an island that was shaped like a heart. And I'm like, okay. So I decided not to go to New York. I moved up to Gainesville, and I took a humble job antiquing wooden Christmas ornaments at Country Plus, so I could meditate by the river. And so each of these places has prepared me for the next, and Ichitucknee ultimately prepared me for Mount Shasta. But I spent 5 years very fervently in discovery and exploration of the Ichitucknee. And each spring, I formed a relationship with at different times, and they had different blessings and lessons and characteristics. And then I would go on to another spring and really get involved with that one. But there was one spring near the mission group that was really weird. And it had this strange algae that we now know as lingia. And it was dark, and there was no life forms in the spring at all. It was almost like, ugh. You know, it gives you chills when you see this thing. You know, it's like that I was impressed. I was like, there's something about this. Well, of course, later on, the lingia would start to characterize other parts of the river, and transition would begin. But before that transition happened, I decided I wanted to match my vibration to the Ichitucknee. So I gave up my bad habits, and I changed my diet, and I started to meet these wonderful spiritual people that taught me about meditation and how to eat properly. And I learned about organic farms and organic food, and I started working on seeing, could I possibly match my vibration to that crystal clear river? And in the spring of 1988, I did. It was a very powerful experience. And then it wasn't long after that that I was called out west, and I started my experience with Mount Shasta. So my experience with the springs is not limited to Florida. So I had had visions of Mount Shasta all my life, not knowing what it was or why I was called to it. But when I ultimately found it, I knew I had to spend time there. And when I got up on the mountain, I was led to this beautiful alpine meadow that is spring-fed. And I became the resident artist and naturalist there for many, many years. One of the things I did was work with the native people there who revere that spring as being the most sacred place in the world, the Sawel Mem. And their belief system was that the well-being of the spring and the well-being of the meadow was the well-being of the earth was contingent on their well-being. So part of my work was to not only look after this place, but to teach people about the cosmology and the sacredness of the springs. And then this ended up spilling over into all my work here in Florida and in between. I've been very bonded to North America. I've only been off this continent once for about a month to go to Maui, but I would love to go to other places in the world, but I have been very devoted to the North American continent. One time I was driving back from Mount Shasta, and my intuition told me I needed to go to Hopi land, so I went to Second Mesa, and I went to a cultural center there, and I pulled in, and right away I could see these two guys way down across the parking lot, like waving at me. And I was like... So I went to see them, and they said, "Do you have a connection to eagles?" I'm like, "Yeah." "Do you have a connection to springs?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I do." He said, "We've been waiting for you. We're going to take you on a tour." And I'm like, "Wait a second. How long is this going to take?" You know, I thought I was just going to drop in and I'd be on my way to New Mexico, you know. But no, they want to take me on this long tour. So I'm like, all right, look, I got to eat. Let me get a room at the cultural center. So I went and got a room. I ate. I came back and I got these guys, and we took off. Lamar and William. They're like, "Hey, Johnny, it's good to have you, man." And I'm looking at them like, "Yeah, thanks." So we end up going to these springs that were not flowing. And they brought me there, and they washed my feet in the spring. And they said, "We want you to pray." Well, I happen to know enough of Hopi language that I prayed in their language, which completely blew their mind because they had no idea that I could do that, but I did. And then they told me, they said, "Our problem is this. You know, we have a strong multi-thousand-year heritage on this property that acknowledge the holy organic pattern and the sacredness of all the elements in the water. It's a very strong spiritual law. And 30 years ago, our people divided and broke it. And we're suffering. And we want you to pray about that. So I did. I was very honored to do that. The Patuaquatsi is the name of the springs in the Hopi land. So I bonded with them and came back to Florida. I didn't expect to talk about this tonight, but I'm so inspired by these wonderful cultural spring experiences from other parts of the world that I felt like I really needed to enhance my own description about North America. So I've been called to many places to pray and do artworks. I teach, I bring artworks, maps, do map paintings. I feel very strongly about the spiritual connection of ecosystems with the people and the animals and plants that live in them. And despite all the problems that we're facing, I think it's really important to take the long view. There's a principle in physics called autopoiesis, popularized by Friedrich Kaplan, based on studies of ecology. And what this principle simply states is that when you take the pernicious influences out of a natural system or a human body, healing will naturally occur. And that's what we can do, that's what we need to do, that's what we will do. There will be retreats, there'll be meditations, there'll be education that incorporates the spirituality as well as the scientific knowledge. And we're going to raise the Springs culture up. I have one more piece to show you here. This is my Ichitagni wildflower wheel. One of the ways I teach is by creating things that people can relate to. So after years of studying Ichitagni, I discovered that there were native indigenous wildflowers that bloom in each month of the year. So everybody has a birth flower at the Ichitagni. If you come up and ask me, I'll tell you what your birth flower is. Meanwhile, I have $20 Ichitagni wildflower prints available here if you're interested in taking one of those home. I think sense of place is the most important thing we can emphasize. We all can work on it. We can all share together. But more than anything, I just want to thank you for being such a wonderful family and for loving me and for loving each other. And I look forward to what we do with what we've been given to carry the best and the highest into the future. Thank you very much.
Vicki Machado is a recent PhD graduate in religion and nature from the University of Florida. She's now teaching nature writing and nature spirituality at Rollins College as a visiting assistant professor of environmental studies. For the Florida Humanities Council Speakers Bureau, Vicki presents a program on exploring Florida's sacred waters. Tonight, she uses the concept of the sacred to help us understand our springs and local waterways. And since Vicki doesn't have slides, we're not going to have a meditation after her, but we're going to have a quick talk from a special guest. So, Vicki, you want the...
I'll try it. Okay.
Okay, it's a hard act to follow. Well, thank you, everyone. I am so grateful to be here among friends and teachers who have framed my own journey and continue to act as these beacons of inspiration. And so when I think about the sacred, it can be important to consider the larger narratives that we tell. And so you heard these narratives tonight. These are narratives of the water as beings, the water as an eye. These are journeys to springs in summer and in winter, and to shrines. These are the water as natural living systems in which we join hands with. These are spaces where we open our hearts to holy irrigation and ritual offerings, where we meet river muses, we bond and we honor and we cultivate senses of place. And these are places where we venture into heart-shaped openings, whose vibrations lead us to taking the long views. And so these are narratives that we tell not just as individuals, but as collective communities. We inhabit this world together, and history shows us that we can shift public perceptions. It's what took a swamp, a wasteland, and it turned it into a river of grass. And so in a similar manner, we can take these springs, these places that are already magical in their own right, places of our hearts, but there are also places of recreation and resource use. And we can consider the inherent value that they offer. They offer us spaces of the holy and the sacred and the divine, and not just for us, but also for the larger biotic community. Because I think it's really important for us to shift our focus from an anthropocentric understanding, one that is human-centered, to a biocentric understanding, where we are considering other beings, not just human beings, but non-human beings and other life forms. And so this is just the beginning of a much larger conversation, one that is powerful, and one that is dynamic, and one that is intersectional, and that considers a range of voices, including that of the water. So I will end with that.
Okay, we have a special guest, Bob Ulanowicz, who I have known for many years, who has a book here that dovetails with this whole conversation. Bob, would you like to say a few quick words?
Yes, thank you. You gave me 30 seconds, and I'm very grateful. I'm Bob Ulanowicz. I'm a retired member of the board of the Florida Springs Institute, and it was just wonderful to be part of that. But you're here because you're interested in the transcendental and the springs, okay? I came here to Gainesville, actually, into the Florida Springs Institute because I'm interested in science and the transcendental. And as you all know, that's sometimes separated because science has been formed around essentially objects, object-oriented, objects and laws, things acting according to laws. But that's not all of nature, as you've been told. There are also things that are happening, processes. They're not only processes, but there are configurations of processes. Johnny mentioned autopoiesis. An autopoiesis is an example of a configurational process that has properties that you can't get to from physics. It's beyond the lens of physics. And that's what I wrote about. I bought a few copies. I didn't expect such a big group. I would have brought more. But it's called The First Incarnation, Hope and Reality. And the idea here is that, for example, Thomas Aquinas says that there are two ways of knowing God. One of them is the book of Revelation. That's what you hear about mostly in religion. But the other is the book of nature. And we probably haven't given enough concentration on the book of nature. That's what I've tried to do by describing ecosystems not as objects and laws, but as relationships, as as Lou mentioned, as relationships. And what you discover, okay, is that with the conventional format of science, it's easy to extirpate the transcendental from science. Okay, you hear about that all the time. But if you get into relationships and configurations of relationships, you can't extirpate it. It's not that you can prove the transcendental, but you can't say no, it's not possible, because it's looks very possible. So I invite you, if you want to, I've got a few books that I can sell, but I should warn you that you have to know a little bit about physics to see what the limitations to physics are. And I worry that some people will fall asleep with it, but if you want to have a chance, they're here. Thank you very much for that.
I think that may be the most honest book plug I've ever heard. Let's thank our presenters. For their generosity. Thank the Right to Clean Water folks for being here. And thank Jim for his flutes and Michael for the video. And please don't forget the donation boxes and to visit the Right to Clean Water table and talk to Carl and David, because you need to know about this because it's important. I'm going to yap about one last thing, and then I want to close with a couple of snippets from literature. I think those of us who first encountered the springs, as I did, in the middle of the 20th century, may be the last people to know what a healthy spring is supposed to look like. That's a tough thing to say, but I'm being honest too. I think it's important that we document what our springs have meant to us. So I encourage everyone here to share your stories with your children, your grandchildren, and with as many other people as you can. Tell your stories, share your photos, create art, make music, honor our sacred springs with your creative gifts in whatever way you choose. Document, document, document. Here's a poetry snippet from Life Chant by Diane DePrima, who was in that cohort of American poets that includes Jack Kerouac and Gary Snyder. May the wind deal kindly with us. May the fire remember our names. May springs flow, rain fall again. May the land grow green. May it swallow our mistakes. And this is a favorite from the novelist Charles Fraser. The spring rose up from its deep source and smelled of wet earth and the stones at the center of the world. Whatever you believe and whatever God you pray to, a place where clean water rises from the earth is in some way sacred. Now, do we have any, we have maybe a few minutes, Haley, can we take a few minutes for questions? It's getting late. She says yes. Who would have a question for any of our speakers? Anybody? Okay, well, maybe let's have some refreshments and talk to the presenters. There's books for sale. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for caring. Because do it again next year. Okay.